Today we come to the author of the book we're reading, Matthew. Isn't it interesting that the book of Matthew isn't about Matthew at all? Or very little of it is about Matthew. If you were writing a book and it was a true story, and it was a historical story, and it took place during your time, wouldn't you be tempted to write a little bit more about you? I think I would be. If you were part of the events happening, wouldn't you want to include your thoughts and your feelings, at the very least? It's interesting that for Matthew, he spares just a few verses about him. He includes himself in some of those other events, sure. But when it comes to talking about his place in the story, we have verses 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And then it shifts back. And even in those few verses, Matthew's not the main character, is he? I think that's important for us to notice that in this story, the person we're watching, the person we're paying attention to, it's Jesus. When you choose to follow him, the story's not about you anymore. It can't be about you. So Matthew tells us this story about when he was invited to follow Jesus. What motivates you? That's a good question. There's lots of things that can motivate you. There's lots of feelings or emotions or goals. I mean, some of us are motivated by hunger. And it doesn't matter what you're hungry for. Hunger can be an amazing motivation, right? How do you think we teach animals to do stuff? My dogs, when we trained our dogs, we tried to use words of affirmation, but they just looked at us not understanding any of the English we were using. Now, my dogs, I think, know when I say good boy that I'm encouraging them. But I think it's probably because when I've said good boy, I've also given them a treat. We have one dog at our house. She will do anything for food. In fact, if you're eating a sandwich and you're not paying attention to your sandwich, you might feel her wet, slobbery lips wrapping around your hand because she will do anything for food. She will spin in a circle. She will jump over a baby gate because hunger can be an amazing motivator. In fact, in the stories of Jesus, we'll find that there are people who follow Jesus because he will give them bread. Hunger can motivate you. How about fear? Does fear ever motivate you? Have you ever had to turn a light off in a basement, but the light was, through horrible planning, not at the door of the basement? I remember once going to turn off a light in a shed behind our house. This was when I was a child. And I remember going through, my parents lived in a wooded lot, and going out and turning off the light in the shed. And it was a cloudy, overcast night, and there was complete darkness all around. Do you know how quickly I moved from the shed back to the house? I was motivated. And it's interesting. You're not afraid of the dark. No one is afraid of the dark. What are you afraid of? What's in the dark, what you can't see in the dark. How many people do you think run and run and run because fear drives them? I think there's a lot of people. Shame is a powerful motivator. Shame is an incredibly powerful motivator. We're going to talk about shame this morning. We're going to talk about following Jesus and leaving your past behind. We're going to talk about our own shame. We're going to talk about what shame drives us to. And we are going to talk about the place where shame disappears. Because Jesus is calling us, and shame is part of this story. So let's look at the text. It says, as Jesus went on from there, remember, Jesus has been going around the countryside. He's been calling people to follow him. He's been performing miracles, and the miracles are pointing to the fact that he is the one they've been waiting for. When Jesus does a miracle, it always has a meaning beyond the miracle itself. When Jesus comes and heals diseases, he says, I'm putting an end, my kingdom is coming, and there is an end to this death that you see in the world all around us. When Jesus commands the evil spirits, what he is demonstrating for us is that one has come who has the power over life and death, and even the spirits obey him. They're all pointing to the fact that Jesus is announcing the coming of a kingdom that the Hebrew people have been waiting for. Here is the Son of David. Here is the answer to all those promises. And so Jesus has been going around the countryside, and people recognize his authority, and people are seeing in him something they haven't seen at other places. And so Jesus has been doing these things, and as he's been wandering around, we've got little vignettes, little stories. And this is another one of these little stories. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. It's likely that Matthew was like a customs official. I don't know how you feel crossing the border. I'm usually a little bit nervous crossing the border, not because I've done anything wrong, because I'm wondering if I forgot something that I should have remembered to declare when I go across the border. You know the easiest way if you ever have to cross an international border like the one we have at the bridge over here, the best thing you can do is find little children who are upset at the moment. Because I have found in my experience, if you have screaming children in the car, you are not likely to be a smuggler or a terrorist. At least that's the opinion of customs officials. But the reason I think I get nervous around customs officials is because they have an authority to make my life difficult, or they have the power to make my life difficult. They've been given authority to exercise justice, at least that's what they're supposed to be doing, and enforcing laws, at least that's what they're supposed to be doing. But the danger, certainly the danger in Matthew's day, was that that authority could be used for personal gain. And certainly for the Hebrew people, for the Jews, if you were exercising that authority by Roman approval, you were selling out your people to execute justice of foreign oppressors, the justice of foreign oppressors, their justice, quote unquote justice. So, two reasons for people to dislike people like Matthew in his day. Number one, he was the representative of a foreign oppressor. He was their man. He was their agent. And number two, people like Matthew in his position would have the opportunity to gain for themselves what they had no right to, because they can make your life difficult if you didn't give them what you wanted. And people like that often become very wealthy at the expense of the vulnerable. It's no surprise then that Matthew's friends a little later on are described as tax collectors and sinners. Do you know how many times those two words are connected, or those two ideas are connected in the Gospels? Lots. Go read the Gospels of Jesus. You will find that there's a group of people, and those ideas are connected together. Luke actually uses it quite a bit. When we want to talk about the lowest of the low, those society does not approve of, it always talks about, or it usually talks about, the tax collectors and the sinners. These are Matthew's friends. These are the ones who he invites over to the party. So Jesus comes and he finds Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth, and he says, "Follow me," which is already surprising. If you're going to begin a movement, if you're gonna start something great, do you go and find the best of the best? Or do you pick up the people everybody has cast off? Well, we are going to hear over and over again through the Gospels, Jesus' kingdom is an upside-down kingdom. The first will be last. And the least of these will be greatest in the kingdom, right? Jesus' kingdom is upside down. So already, we've reached chapter 9. We've already seen how Jesus picks the least likely people to be invited into what he is doing. And that's exactly what we find as he calls Matthew. And Matthew does the only thing that matters. When Jesus comes and he calls, there's only one thing that matters, and Matthew gets it right. Let me read it for you. Jesus went on from there. He saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. He said, "Follow me." And Matthew got up and he followed him. That's the only thing that matters. Matthew didn't present a resume saying, "Jesus, you really need to have me on your team." Matthew didn't say, "Listen, Jesus, I'm going to try and convince you that I'm the man you need." Matthew didn't say, "Jesus, you don't want me. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. I'm not the sort of person that you want in your kingdom." He doesn't try and talk Jesus out of it. What does Matthew do? He says, "Okay, I'm coming." Matthew saw in Jesus something more important than the table he sat at. Matthew saw someone more powerful than all the weight of Rome that had brought order to the world. Think about that. Have you heard the joke about how often men think about the Roman Empire? There's this ongoing joke that men think about the Roman Empire at least once a day. I actually always preferred the Greeks. I don't know why. When I was in college, one of our history professors said, if you want to see the difference between Roman and Greek thought, the Romans ask how and the Greeks ask why. But the Romans were truly impressive. See, they weren't so concerned about figuring out how the long side of a triangle, you could figure it out. They didn't care so much about that. What they wanted to know is, how do I build a road from here to there? Because I need to move soldiers and wealth from place to place. So let's build a road. And we're happy to take all that math that the Greeks taught us and use it. The Roman Empire was remarkable. And yet Matthew, sitting at his booth, said, "I have found someone who is better, whose order," think about this, the greatest empire in terms of bringing peace and order, the Pax Romana, the peace across the world. Rome brought peace through force. And yet when Matthew met Jesus, he found the Prince of Peace, and he said, "I found one greater than Caesar." And he got up and he followed him. So Matthew invites Jesus over to his house, and they have a dinner party. Many tax collectors and sinners came there and ate with him and his disciples. So we have tax collectors on one side, sitting with Jesus. What's the other group that's going to show up? If you have tax collectors, there's almost certainly going to be another group mentioned, right? We know this. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Do you remember when you were in high school? Do you remember in high school? There is no one cooler in high school than someone who owns their own vehicle. No one. That's a fact. I will argue it with you. If you are 16 years old and you have your own vehicle to drive to school, you are of the very highest social status that can be achieved. Period. Do you know the most embarrassing thing that can happen to you while you're in high school? It also has to do with a vehicle. The most embarrassing thing that can happen to an individual in high school is to get up in the morning and miss the bus and have mom in her house coat and curlers drive you to school. To have mom wave you down because you got out of the car so quickly that you forgot your lunch on the seat. And she waves you down, and she gets out of the car, and she runs up, and she gives you your lunch, and then she gives you a kiss on the cheek. And all your friends are killing themselves laughing. Because when you're in high school, the last thing you want to be associated with is your parents in their most embarrassing moments. Association can bring either status or it can bring shame. Association can bring either status or it can bring shame. And I want you to pay attention because this is what the Pharisees were doing right here. They're seeing association as either bringing shame or establishing status. They say, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? For them, being associated with the tax collector makes you like a tax collector. For them, being associated with sinners infects you with their shame. And for the high school student crawling out of the vehicle, trying their best to sneak in the back door so no one sees them, the Pharisees have built their lives on only associating with the right kind of people. And I want to ask you, why do you think that is? I think it comes back to shame. I think shame is the motivating factor in this. There are different ways you can deal with shame, but can I give you two alternatives that we find in this story? There may be other options. I don't know that there are, but there are two given in this story, and we need to hear them right now because they matter for us. The first option is the one taken by the Pharisees. We all feel shame at some point. I won't ask you to share your stories with me. Maybe you want to do it around Sandwich Sunday. Maybe our lighthearted conversations can include a couple of those moments where we felt shame. I know one of the ones that makes me feel a deep sense of shame. I'll share it with you now. When I think about it now, this is going back decades. Not quite half a century. I'm not that old yet. But decades. More than a quarter century. There's more than 25 years distance between that day and this day, and yet when I think of this event, I feel in the pit of my stomach a dropping coldness. I don't know if that's a good way to describe it. I can't describe it to you. I feel shame. I was invited to sing for the church one evening, and I made a mistake, and instead of admitting to my mistake and starting again, I sort of looked at my mother and I pretended that it was her fault because I wanted to do anything except feel the weight of my failure. And so I tried to pass it off to someone else. And the thought of how foolish that was, nobody cared. Nobody was mad at me that I made a mistake. But in my failure, I just wanted to escape. And so I did what I should not have done. And I feel shame about that. So the question is, what do you do with that shame? Maybe your story of shame is a lot worse than that. And I could share stories that are a lot worse than what I just shared. I can think of moments where my ministry, the future of my ministry, was on a knife's edge. And had not God been gracious to me, I wouldn't be preaching for you now. Because I'm not good enough. I am not good enough to be my own salvation and I need Jesus. He alone can make me able to stand here and preach the word to you this morning. We all have shame, but what are we going to do with it? And in this story, we find a group of people who have become experts on dealing with shame, the Pharisees. Do you know how they deal with shame? The Pharisees, in order to deal with shame, have set up a system of rules that they can check off on a list. Do this, do this, do this, do that. And if you will convince yourself this is what being a good person looks like, and you make it within your reach, if you make that list within your reach, you can convince yourself you're a good person. How many of you embezzled tens of thousands of dollars from your company? Probably not many of us. How many of you robbed widows? Well, you know what? Let's not examine that too closely. But how many of you have gone out and broken the big laws that would land you in prison for years and years and years? Probably not many of you. Each of us probably has a personalized list of this is what good people do And this is what bad people do. And I do all the things on the one list, and I don't do any of the things on the other list. And if I transgress, if I break that speed limit, if I drive through that red light, I will find a way of explaining why either it didn't matter or I was justified in that case to do it. Right? What we do is we build a system that says, here is a framework in which I can make myself feel like a good person. But we don't usually stop at that. We build something that's within our reach and say, this is what a good person looks like. But we don't stop there. We then find counter examples to lift ourselves up. Right? So to make ourselves, to deal with our shame, we will set up a standard that we can achieve, but we will also then pick people who clearly don't live up to that standard and say, at least I'm better than them. And as long as we can create a distance between the bad people and us, we will have pushed aside, we will have staved off, we will not feel with sharpness and an acute sort of sense of pain the fact that we have shame lingering. The Pharisees looked at the tax collectors and the sinners and said, we are not like that. We are good people. Has that dealt with their shame? Not at all. I read an article not long ago and it said, when did the standard for morality switch? Jesus used to be the standard for morality. Or if you don't want to pick Jesus, pick some other high figure. When did it switch from us aspiring to greatness instead to avoiding plummeting to the bottom? If you ask someone, are you a good person today? They may say, yes, I'm just like Jesus. They might. They're wrong, by the way. They're not just like Jesus. They might say some other figure, some popular, primarily good figure, or something that someone we think of as a society as being a good person. They may say, yes, I'm just like that, but they are far more likely to say, yes, I'm a good person. I'm nothing like so-and-so. We have switched in our moral stance to not aspiring to perfect or goodness on a high scale. What we have done instead is said we have not sunk to the depths of men like Hitler. Like those who have oppressed and wounded and hurt. Do you hear what we've done in that? We have not sought to be what God made us to be. We've avoided being as bad as we could be and said, well, isn't that good enough? It's exactly what the Pharisees did. What's the other alternative? The other alternative is what Matthew did. It's what all these tax collectors and sinners were offered as they came to the table. Jesus says, on hearing this, it is not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have come to not to call the righteous, but sinners. You see, the Pharisees thought that by associating with the sinners, they themselves would be infected with the sinners' shame. Jesus says, I have come to take away their shame. It's the exact opposite. It's the exact opposite. Jesus, the doctor, Jesus, the great healer, doesn't come to the world and say, everybody's coughing and sneezing, I need to get out of here. Jesus doesn't come to the world and see how bad we are and immediately look for the exit. What sort of doctor would it be who goes to the hospital, realizes it's full of sick people, and immediately resigns? They're not a doctor. That's the reality. The people who needed Jesus were not those who were convinced they were good people. The people who need Jesus are those who recognize they're lost They're sick. They're dying. Paul says in Romans 7, who will deliver me from this body of death? I want to tell you this morning, Jesus is calling you to follow him and leave what's in the past behind you. He is freeing you, setting you free from your shame if you will have him. That is the witness of the gospel. I joked earlier about talking to Peter, how he's always the butt of the joke in the Gospels. Peter's the one who sinks in the water. Peter's the one who swings the sword at someone's head and all he gets is their ear. Peter's the one who speaks without thinking. Can I tell you something? There is no one, I am convinced of this, there is no one whose name is mentioned in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John who knew the power of Jesus' ability to remove shame like Peter. Because when the moment of crisis came and Peter was asked, aren't you one of his followers? Peter denied his Lord 3 times. Peter did essentially the worst thing you could do to Jesus. He said, after being with you, after seeing all these things that you've done, Jesus, I'm still not convinced. I'm still not there where I can give myself to it. There's times where I'm going to run. There's times where I'm going to hide. Peter hid when he was asked to stand up. We're told shortly after Jesus rose from the dead, he came to Peter, and with gentleness, Jesus told Peter, I haven't given up on you. And Peter's shame became a thing of the past. In fact, Peter heard the words, I love you, I love you, I love you. Follow me. If you struggle with shame, Jesus wants you to follow him. This is what it says in the book of Hebrews. When Christ came as a high priest of the good things that are already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made, that is to say, not a part of creation. He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, having obtained eternal redemption. The blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who were ceremonially unclean to sanctify them. That was done so that we become outwardly clean. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse, listen to what it says, cleanse our consciences from the acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God. Do you hear what it's saying to you this morning? Whatever shame you used to carry, Jesus has dealt with it. It's done. He's calling you to follow him. And as long as you continue to push it off, as long as you try and use shame as a thing that drives you to work harder or create more separation, you will never know the beautiful truth of the gospel that Jesus can set you free. Can I read you just a couple quotes? Troy, just put the first one up there. Start with Spurgeon. It's always a good idea to start with Spurgeon. No measure of sin in your past life can deprive you of this promise. Whoever believeth on him, though he had been a murderer or a thief or a drunkard or an adulterer or a liar or a blasphemer, shall find his faith removing his sins through the blood of Jesus and renewing his heart by the Holy Spirit. Whoever believed on him shall not be ashamed. I think John Piper actually repeats this more succinctly in probably more modern language. In the case of well-placed shame, Piper's talking about shame that is true and right. The case of well-placed shame for sin, the pain ought to be there, but it ought not to stay there. If it does, it's owing to unbelief in the promises of God. Jesus said, I have paid it all. It is finished. If you still feel shame after coming to him, you just haven't believed the promise. One more quote there. Ray Ortland. Listen to what it says. The gospel says your shame is real, even more real than you know. But this is what God has done. He put it all onto Christ at the cross, where your substitute was utterly shamed and exposed and condemned for you. Now, your shame no longer defines you. I'm going to read that again. Your shame no longer defines you. What defines you, what reveals your future forever, is this word, adorned. You can find it in Revelation 21:2. Not shamed, adorned, lovely, attractive. The moment is coming when he will look into your eyes with glad adoration, and you will look into his eyes with confident surrender, and nothing will ever spoil it again. I think that's one of the things that I was raised in a very traditional Baptist church. We sang hymns mostly. And when we sing some of those old hymns I was raised with, there's a sense of this freedom, this forgiveness, this cleansing. It penetrates me through the hymns. We already sang it, one of my favorite hymns. And it's probably one of your favorites, or at least it's one that you know well. We sang, "It Is Well With My Soul," right? And if you know the story of Spafford as he wrote that hymn, it was in the least likely of circumstances for someone to say, "It's well, it's well, it's well." He's in the middle of deep grief. He's experienced great loss, and yet he turns to Jesus and he says, "Even in these moments, it is well with my soul." And my favorite verse of that hymn, bar none, and if you've listened to my preaching for any length of time, as many of you have done, you already know what I'm going to say, is when we get to the verse when it says, "My sin, oh the bliss of this glorious thought, my sin, not in part but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more." Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not my Lord was crucified, knowing not it was for me he died on Calvary. By God's word at last my sin I learned. Then I trembled at the law I'd spurned, till my guilty soul imploring turned to Calvary. Now I've given to Jesus everything. Now I gladly own him as my king. Now my raptured soul can only sing of Calvary. Oh, the love that drew salvation's plan. Oh, the grace that brought it down to man. Oh, the mighty gulf that God did span at Calvary. Mercy there was great, and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty. At Calvary. Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through his infinite mercy, his child, and forever I am. This is how Jesus put it, and I'll end with these words. To some who were confident in their own righteousness and looked down on everybody else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One, a Pharisee, and the other, a tax collector. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? The Pharisee stood up and he prayed about himself. Isn't that interesting? He prayed not to God, he prayed about himself. God, I thank you. I thank you that I am not like other men, robbers and evildoers and adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all that I get. Amen. But the tax collector, he stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his own breast and he said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Jesus said, I tell you the truth. This man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. Let's pray.